Hey guys, tonight we're going to tiptoe into a world that was somehow even more terrifying than the DMV waiting room. Victorian medicine. That's right. Before band-aids, before antibiotics, before anyone even washed their hands on purpose, people actually let doctors poke, prod, and saw their way through all sorts of curing. So, before we start dosing you with that sweet, sleep-inducing nonsense, go ahead and like this video and subscribe, but only if the idea of leeches for lunch makes you smile. Drop a comment about what time you're listening, or just confess the strangest thing you've ever Googled for a headache. Now please, dim those lights, crank your fan up to Victorian ghost whispers mode, and get cozy under your blanket. Ever wonder if you'd survive a checkup without anesthetic? Would you have let a mustachioed man in a frock coat bleed you for a bad cough? Did anyone ever actually use those mysterious blue pills? Or live to regret it? Would your upset stomach be improved with a little mercury? And more importantly, could you spot the real doctor in a room full of deeply suspicious sideburns? Congratulations, you have just woken up in 1863. Your doctor has a bone sore, your remedy smells like gin, and there's a good chance someone will offer you tobacco for your nerves. Let's begin your checkup. Welcome to the world's most ominous waiting room. You're surrounded by people coughing into lace handkerchiefs, the air thick with camphor and dramatic sighing. There are no outdated magazines, just a pervasive sense of doom and a faint odour of boiled onions. You take a seat and wonder if you'll ever see daylight or just become part of the decor, like the dusty taxidermied crow by the door. The light filtering in through the frosted windows is not so much illumination as it is a gentle warning. Abandon hope, all ye who enter here. The wallpaper, a sombre green flock, is peeling in places, revealing sepia-toned memories of better days. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors gaze down, as if silently judging both your malaise and your seating choice. Even the chairs conspire against you. Polished wood, painstakingly uncomfortable, rigged to creak at the slightest movement. An orchestra of impatience marking the slow, relentless passage of Victorian time. A brass clock above the mantel lumbers through the hours, intermittently coughing up a wheeze instead of chiming. No one dares to look at it. Statistically, you reason, someone in this room must have arrived last week, and simply never left. Now nothing but an impeccably dressed spectre haunting the premises, still waiting for Dr. Underhill's dire diagnosis. The other patients are a pageant of Victorian ailments. Opposite, a young woman in mourning attire dabs at her temples with eau de cologne and mutters about a nervous disposition. To your left, a stooped man wrapped in shawls clutches a small bottle of laudanum like a worry stone, his eyes darting between the door and the fireplace, as though calculating which escape route would draw the least attention. Nearby, a child with an elaborate head bandage sits on her mother's lap, regarding you solemnly as if weighing the odds of your survival. Silence reigns, punctuated by fits of coughing, the rustle of taffeta skirts, and the occasional clink of a teacup. On the antique side table, the tea is tepid, the sugar bowl suspiciously sticky. You consider taking a cup, but something about the milk, floating in it, almost swimming, suggests the risk of adding dysentery to your list of possible complaints. Now and then, Mrs. Fig, the receptionist, emerges in a flurry of ruffles and starched respectability to call out the next patient's name. Her presence is both reassuring and terrifying. Reassuring because progress is being made. Terrifying because her cryptic smile and monumental sidebun suggest she knows secrets about your prognosis that she isn't going to share. Time stretches, warps, and ultimately becomes irrelevant in the waiting room. Without your phone, not yet invented, you are forced to seek distraction in a centuries-old copy of Wonders of Hydropathy or The Stained Ceiling Tiles, both equally bleak. In the long glacial minutes, you find yourself pondering the existential quirks of Victorian medicine. Did anyone ever leave this place cured? Or simply marginally less melodramatic? Might Dr. Underhill prescribe more fresh air? Or maybe just a brisk walk by the seaside, administered at dawn in a thick fog? A door opens. All heads swivel. Out steps a gaunt gentleman, perhaps once a robust mill worker, now the proud recipient of a hot mustard poultice and a solemn warning to avoid unwholesome excitements. As he passes, you notice a copy of his prescription, 2 drops of tincture in rosewater before bed, and absolutely no French novels. You try not to make eye contact for fear of acquiring whatever he had by osmosis. Each time the door swings shut, the Victorian crowd settles back, deflated, hope deferred for another interval. Somewhere a piano plays a dirge in another room, its notes drifting through the crack under the door, echoing the collective yearning for answers, or at least for escape. And so you wait, self-consciously upright, hands folded politely, surrounded by an invisible fog of expectation and dried time, wondering when, if ever, your name will be called, and what curious, camphor-scented fate awaits you beyond that ominous threshold. Unlike today's friendly GP, your Victorian doctor is part scientist, part magician, and part enthusiastic gambler. He enters the room wearing a waistcoat, wild-eyed and eager to lunge at your pulse with suspiciously shaky hands. You're either very lucky or about to have something amputated. Doctors in the Victorian era were a peculiar breed. Their training was a curious mix of textbook learning, superstitious guesswork, and hands-on experiments, sometimes on actual hands. Years before the cosy image of the family doctor with a warm bedside manner, a Victorian appointment was half consultation, half spectacle. Step into that chilly parlour, and you might overhear a debate on the merits of leeches versus opium, or the correct technique for bloodletting, a skill prized only slightly below being able to tie a cravat. Treatments, if that's what we can generously call them, ranged from the relatively straightforward, like telling you to rest and take port wine, to the outright bizarre. To help you restore balance, a doctor might recommend strapping you into an elaborate contraption, swinging you upside down, or even giving you a brisk electric jolt. If none of that worked, at least you'd have a memorable story for the next séance. But above all, nothing captured the early Victorian medical imagination quite like amputation. Surgical tools were kept sharp, more for speed than sterility. Surgeons prided themselves on how quickly they could remove a limb, often timing themselves as if competing at a very morbid village fair. Anesthesia, after all, would not become widely available until late in the era, meaning patients relied on bravado, whiskey, or the comforting thought that this was happening to someone else. Of course, the wild confidence of the Victorian doctor was only matched by the wild inconsistencies of the treatments themselves. Diagnoses were sometimes plucked out of thin air, or worse, one's latest medical journal. Were you pale and listless? Consumption, quick, to the seaside. Suffering from headaches and melancholy, definitely hysteria. Here's a nice, relaxing prescription of arsenic and mercury. Physicians frequently divided themselves into firm camps, the staunchly scientific versus the charmingly superstitious. The former carried pocketfuls of lancets and looked down on homeopathy. The latter might secretly dabble in mesmerism or read your bumps for clues. Yes, phrenology was a thing. Both, however, loved their curious gadgets. From stethoscopes to speculums, each new device was displayed like a magician's wand, promising miraculous insights, even if it was your first time seeing one used outside an anatomy drawing. House calls were, inevitably, part theatre. The arrival of the doctor, a cloud of camphor, bracing carriage ride, and a sense of impending drama, roused the whole household. Mothers wrung their hands, children peered through banisters, and the patient braced for either stern advice or a swirling bottle of laudanum. In an age before antibiotics, there was little a doctor could truly cure, but plenty to be talked into. Yet for all the tragedy and frequent incompetence, these doctors were, in their own strange way, pioneers. The era's medical journals brimmed with debates over microscopic discoveries. Antiseptics and anesthetics were just on the horizon. And even the most theatrical practitioner eventually gave way to the pragmatic realities of science. The Victorian doctor was a harbinger, standing awkwardly at the threshold between the mysterious past, where illness was a curse, and the methodical, sterile future. So the next time you grumble about waiting rooms or the impersonal touch of a modern GP, remember, at least you're not at the mercy of a doctor who doubles as a stage magician, part-time philosopher, and lifelong fan of the bone saw. Your pulse is probably much safer for it. Victorian medicine loves a theory, and the theory of bodily humours wasn't going anywhere fast. Your problems? Too much yellow bile, not enough black bile, or perhaps the wrong sort of phlegm. You're about to find out just how literal getting your humours in balance can be The four humours weren't just abstract medieval leftovers. They were the very core of diagnosis, treatment, and occasionally pure panic. According to this theory, which, let's be clear, dates back to the ancient Greeks, human beings are basically walking vats of fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, each sloshing around in what doctors imagined was delicate but critical equilibrium. If you sneezed too often or napped too much, the issue wasn't your raging pollen allergy or lack of caffeine, but your humours, misbehaving, rebelling, and possibly plotting your downfall from within. Victorian doctors inherited this legacy and doubled down like medical gamblers at a humour roulette. Have a fever. That's excess blood. Best to drain some out. Persistent melancholy? Black bile, obviously. A brisk walk, a purgative, or just a stern warning about moping should help. Suffering digestive problems? Must be overactive yellow bile. So brace yourself for the gentlest of Victorian interventions. A hearty dose of emetics to purge your system. As scientific as Victorian medicine tried to look, much of it boiled down to a kind of grim kitchen science, with your body as the cauldron. Treatments ranged from the reasonably benign, herbal infusions targeting a specific humour imbalance, to the genuinely terrifying. Bloodletting, leeching and purging became household words. And they weren't just for the sick. Preventative bloodletting was a thing. Think of it as a seasonal oil change for your veins, except with less mechanical efficiency and a lot more fainting. Doctors, at the time, believed that the visual evidence of humours gone rogue was everywhere. A pale complexion hinted at too much phlegm. An irritable or choleric temperament belonged to the yellow bile club. They even divided personalities by humoral excesses, so if your cousin was known for her exuberant parties, thank her sanguine blood. If your uncle sulked at the corner table, blame it on his dominant black bile. But the influence of humoral theory wasn't limited to diagnosis alone. Prescriptions targeted more than just the body. They policed lifestyle and morality too. A well-balanced Victorian didn't just eat bland food and wrap up warm. They also strove for emotional moderation in all things. Anger wasn't simply a character flaw, but yellow bile on the boil. Sadness wasn't just a life event, but black bile leaking into the soul. The methods for restoring so-called balance were not for the faint of heart or stomach. Bloodletting, with its ritualistic array of knives, cups, and leeches, left many Victorians weaker than when they started. Purging and vomiting cured excess biles, while drinking odd concoctions encouraged your phlegm to get back in line. All of this, performed by doctors with an almost theatrical flair, made Victorian medicine as much a spectacle as a science. It's strange to realise how much hope Victorians pinned on the balance of invisible fluids. Every cough, headache, or bout of blues had a humour to blame and a horrifying remedy to match. Even as microscopes revealed new worlds and germs tiptoed onto the medical stage, the humours stubbornly clung on, a goopy legacy, both outlandish and deadly serious. So before we move on to Victorian cures even stranger than their diagnoses, let's pause here, somewhere between fascination and horror, at the era's devotion to the gory gospel of the humours. Let me know if you'd like further adjustment to tone, voice, or level of vivid detail. Nothing says modern science like draining half a pint of your precious blood because you sneezed at breakfast. Lie back and relax as your doctor flourishes a set of knives so large you're starting to suspect you're on the guest list for a secret magic show. Now, before you can say medical malpractice, it's important to realise that for almost 2,000 years, bloodletting was not just accepted medicine, it was the medicine. The reigning logic wasn't, let's actually find out what's wrong with the patient, but rather, what would Galen do? Who was Galen? Only the top influencer physician of the Roman Empire, whose theories about the four humours, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, became the go-to diagnosis manual for centuries. If you had a headache, a stubbed toe, or a general distaste for Mondays, the answer was often the same. Let's freshen things up with a little bloodletting. But let's not imagine this as a quick finger prick at your local pharmacy. No, a true visit to a barber surgeon. Yes, the term is literal. The fellow who shaves your neck is also trained to bleed it, was a carnivalesque event. Bloodletting kits included lancets, fleams, and sometimes leeches, all lovingly stored in beautiful wooden boxes. After all, nothing spruced up a Saturday morning like opening your veins into a porcelain bowl while your barber hummed a sea shanty. Even more delightful, there wasn't a single agreed-upon method or quantity. Some physicians insisted that blood had to be drawn from the arm closest to the afflicted organ. Others went in for as much as a litre at a time, enough to knock you out, then and there. Had a fever, lose some blood, suffering from melancholy. Surely you just need less blood. Did you faint after blood loss? That's how you know it's working. The practice was democratic in its own way. Royalty and peasants alike were bled regularly, either to cure disease or simply prevent it. In fact, several famous deaths are attributed directly to overzealous bloodletting. Think George Washington, whose sore throat escalated into a mortal problem only after his doctors drained nearly 5 pints of blood in less than a day. At least he was in good company. A veritable who's who of historical figures exited stage left, thanks to an enthusiastic application of the ultimate reset button. But perhaps most bizarre is how bloodletting managed to persist even as medicine slowly advanced. When microbiology began to suggest that invisible pathogens cause disease, not bad vibes or imbalanced humours, bloodletting didn't quietly retreat into the background. No, it dug in its nails and held on, with some physicians clinging stubbornly to their cherished bowls and blades well into the 19th century, long after stethoscopes and microscopes had joined the party. It proved perhaps more than any single treatment that medicine is as much about tradition and a stubborn refusal to admit you might be wrong as it is about science. Yet for all its gore-soaked drama, bloodletting wasn't just a product of ignorance. In a world before antibiotics, or even an understanding of germ theory, the ritual offered structure, a way for doctors and patients to do something. When you're desperate, doing anything feels better than doing nothing. And few things seem more proactive than watching your blood trickle into a delicate china cup, while your practitioner assures you relief is just around the corner. Today, while bloodletting as a cure-all is mercifully extinct, it lives on in one corner of modern medicine. The symbolic cleansing diets, juice fasts, and detox foot baths that promise to reset your system. We've just swapped the Lancet for a smoothie blender and a marketing campaign. There's a certain comfort in the idea of a reset button, even if the only thing it truly resets is our capacity for self-delusion. So, the next time you hear about a miracle health trend or the latest ancient practice rediscovered, remember bloodletting, the ultimate cure for everything, except, perhaps, itself. Time to meet the original organic remedy, the leech. These little guys are slapped on everything from bruises to heartbreak. As you watch one wriggle up your shin, you wonder if maybe you should have just stayed home and drank more gin. There's a unique thrill in knowing your ancestors, faced with mysterious aches and a bad mood, reached for a jar of squiggly bloodsuckers and thought, yes, this is medicine. Leeches were the OG multitaskers. Sore throat, leeches, swollen knee, toss a leech on it, suffering from general malaise and a vague sense of existential dread. Why not? Let's grab a whole handful and see what happens. The logic: if your humours are out of whack, those all-important bodily fluids everyone swore by in the olden days, a little bloodletting just might set you straight. The application process was part medical intervention, part fear factor challenge. First, you had to wrangle the leech. Slippery, slimy, and a little too eager, these creatures were often stored in glass jars and required the skill of a juggler to extract without launching one across the room. Next came the placement, directly onto your skin, preferably somewhere visible for maximum dramatic effect. The leech did its thing, latching on with an enthusiastic chomp, while you tried to maintain a sense of dignity as your blood drained out, drop by drop, into its little gelatinous belly. If you're squeamish, you'll be relieved to know that leeches are quite selective, preferring not to feast in vain. They secrete a cocktail of chemicals, including a handy anticoagulant called hirudin, to keep your blood flowing nicely. Medieval doctors didn't know about hirudin, of course, but they did know patients would sometimes bleed profusely and look very impressive. Occasionally, the bleeding wouldn't stop, which, you might guess, was not very helpful, but great for the drama. Of course, nothing boosts a treatment's popularity quite like a royal endorsement. King Charles II of England was a well-known leech enthusiast, though, to be fair, he was also a fan of just about any remedy that wasn't nailed down. If it was slimy, gooey, or downright terrifying, Charles was probably game for it. So the next time you think modern wellness trends are weird, remember that once upon a time, nobles deliberately accessorized with live leeches. Think of it as medieval cupping, but with more biting. The leech craze wasn't limited to Europe. In India, practitioners of Ayurveda made leech therapy an art form, deploying the bloodsuckers with careful precision to target everything from poison wounds to migraines. They argued, perhaps correctly, that sometimes the quickest path to feeling better is to let something else do your dirty work. Literally. Incredibly, not every result was horrifying. By removing blood congested at an injury site, leeches could reduce swelling and pain. If you had a black eye, leeches might actually help. Impressive, right? But don't get any bright ideas. self-treating with leeches remains firmly in the not recommended column. Unless you're into unsupervised adventures on both the medical and zoological frontier. Despite their somewhat ghoulish reputation, leeches stuck around for centuries, only falling out of fashion when medicine got a little less medieval and people realized you could just, wash your wounds and maybe take a nap. Yet, like many ancient remedies, they never entirely vanished. Today, high-tech hospitals occasionally dust off the humble leech for reconstructive surgery and to restore blood flow after certain injuries. It's the ultimate case of everything old is new again. So next time you're tempted by an organic healing craze, spare a thought for the lowly leech. Wriggly, misunderstood, and always ready for a bite out of medical history. Whether you see them as ancient healers or tiny vampires, one thing remains certain. Medicine's road to progress is paved with some truly wild ideas. And sometimes, those ideas squirm. Suddenly, it's spa day, but with glass cups heated over a candle and applied to your skin until it looks like angry pepperoni pizza. Is this medicine? Is it punishment? Are you accidentally inventing a new TikTok trend? Let's set the scene. Victorian London, a place where your doctor might order you to bleed, blister, or, on a wild day, slap some heated glass domes on your back and suck up your skin like the world's least enjoyable party trick. Welcome to cupping, a medical fad that swept through the 19th century faster than you can say #wellness. If you thought your last facial was strange, imagine lying face down while your physician creates a vacuum so intense it looks like you've just lost a fight against a mutant squid. This hickey technology, officially known as cupping, was actually ancient, but Victorians, never ones to let a questionable trend pass them by, embraced it with extra enthusiasm. The method starred two classic elements, fire and glass jars. Doctors would light a candle, heat the inside of a cup, and then slap it onto your skin as fast as possible. The air cools inside, creating suction, which draws the skin up into the cup. Congratulations, now you look like you survived a polka dot brawl. But what was the point of all this? Victorian medics swore up and down that cupping would draw out bad humours, boost blood flow, and, because this was still the era of humours, fix everything from fevers to devil possession. Got a headache? Try a cup on your temple. Chronic cough? 6 cups on your back. Sore muscles? They'd cup your arms, legs, or wherever else you dared suggest. No body part was safe from those glass gadgets. Of course, the Victorians didn't invent this. Cupping traditions go back thousands of years, with roots in ancient Egypt, China, and Greece. But as with so many things, these intrepid 19th century medics liked to think they were refreshing the classics. They dressed up their glassware and called it scientific progress, lending an air of cutting-edge technology to what was, essentially, medieval hickey art. And the results, let's just say, dramatic. Patients emerged from these sessions sporting skin the colour of ripe eggplants, attracting horrified stares, and, sometimes, admiration. Cupping marks became weird status symbols. A good doctor could cup you so stylishly, you'd look like you'd attended some secret society's initiation ceremony, not just tried to cure indigestion. Fancy a Victorian Instagram? You'd be posting selfies with your battle scars, #justcupped. But behind the spectacle lay serious intent. Cupping was part of a larger Victorian obsession with moving and manipulating the fluids inside the body. Blood, bile, phlegm, all the icky stuff. If a little was good, a lot must be better, right? Doctors reached for their heated cups in a desperate bid to help the patient, armed with good intentions and a total lack of germ theory. Not that everyone was convinced. Newspapers sometimes mocked the sight of patients shuffling down the street, peeking out from under collars to hide their telltale polka dots. Satirical cartoons depicted doctors as cupping cupids, doling out red round marks to the unwary. Yet, hilariously, some patients swore by the process, providing glowing testimonials. After 6 cups, my cough vanished, or my malaise was entirely uncupped. And in a plot twist only the Victorians could manage, cupping didn't totally vanish. The 21st century wellness world has given it new life. Celebrities show off their purple mug marks on red carpets, fueling another cycle of fascination and skepticism. So next time you see cupping at your local spa, remember, you're walking in the footsteps of Victorian hickey technology. Only now, it comes with scented candles and Instagram filters, rather than top hats and cobblestones. In Victorian medicine, some things never go out of style, even if they probably should. For everything that ails you, from syphilis to sadness, why not try a little mercury? Side effects include tooth loss, tremors, and an irresistible desire to lick thermometers. Cheers to heavy metals in your breakfast. Mercury, also known as quicksilver, glimmers with a certain dangerous appeal, literally. In the wilder days of pre-modern medicine, it was seen as a kind of elixir, a silvery liquid, with the promise to cure whatever had you down. If you could bottle up hope and irresponsibility, shake them vigorously, and pour them over a fresh wound, you'd get mercury. Ancient Chinese alchemists were early adopters, convinced that ingesting mercury, sometimes paired with equally questionable ingredients like arsenic and sulfur, could bring immortality. Spoiler alert, it did not. Fast forward to the 15th century, and mercury develops a surprising reputation as the go-to energy drink for Renaissance Europe's ailing elite. Physicians, always eager to suggest something dramatic, prescribed mercury in everything from ointments to steaming hot vapours. The reasoning was simple. If your patient looks miserable, and your treatments make them look even more miserable, you must be on the right track. Mercury soon found its place as the treatment of choice for the era's #1 sexually transmitted regret, syphilis. Doctors, having little else in their arsenal, would lavishly apply mercury ointments, a process that could take years, if you managed to survive that long. If the disease didn't do you in, the cure just might. But the unique selling point of mercury was not just its apparent ability to cure disease. It was the way it revived patients, with a twitch here, a shake there, and a set of nerves, so lively, they practically buzzed. Just a dab, and soon you'd have more energy than the village rooster. Unfortunate, then, that it was the energy of a poisoned man, gradually sliding into madness. Witnesses of the time described mercury patients as animated, yes, but painfully so, jittery, anxious, and often missing their teeth. Nonetheless, when there's no Red Bull or coffee around, why not give heavy metals a shot? Mercury's star did not dim quietly. As alchemical traditions faded into early chemistry, the odd allure of mercury persisted in both folk and respectable medicine. Even in Victorian England, a touch of calomel, a mercurial compound, could be found in every proper medicine cabinet. Babies were dosed with it, as were the elderly and anyone in between who coughed, sneezed, or looked at a doctor the wrong way. Mercury promised a kind of reset, purge, sweat, and tremble your way back to health. That most patients came away looking like they'd played a few too many rounds with the local hangman was considered a minor inconvenience. What's fascinating is how long it took for people to connect the dots. Hey, maybe our miracle metal isn't as miraculous as we thought. Mercury could drive you mad, rot your gums, and destroy your nervous system, but the myth endured, because in a world with scarce options, the devil you know is sometimes better than the pain you can't escape. Still, it didn't hurt that the stuff looked cool, a gleaming, otherworldly liquid that seemed almost alive. You can forgive a little reckless enthusiasm when the potion in your hand glows like treasure. Eventually, modern science caught up and relegated mercury to the cautionary tales section of medical history, right beside leech therapy and lobotomies. Today, it's a reminder that invigorating isn't always the same thing as healthy. So next time you power through your day with a can of caffeine and a guilty conscience, spare a thought for our mercury-quaffing ancestors. At least your energy drink is unlikely to make your teeth fall out or inspire you to lick thermometers. Raise a glass of something safer to progress and thank your lucky stars that the only heavy metal in your breakfast these days is courtesy of an 80s playlist. Got nerves, heartbreak, persistent existential dread. Victorian doctors prescribed laudanum for it all. It's mostly opium and alcohol, which basically means the average Victorian was one minor inconvenience away from inventing the wellness shot. If you were strolling gloomy cobblestone streets in 1860s London and happened to sneeze, there's a fair chance someone would recommend laudanum, quite possibly before offering you a handkerchief. This mysterious amber tincture wasn't just medicine, it was a universal balm, the Swiss Army knife of Victorian ailments. From teething infants to grieving widows, laudanum was a one-size-fits-all solution. In fact, pharmacies displayed it on shelves as casually as we might stock ibuprofen today, blissfully unaware, or perhaps in willful denial, of the snake coiled in the bottle. The recipe? Simplicity itself. Take a generous dose of opium, full of the same morphine that has fueled centuries of poetry and bed rest. Dissolve it in high-proof ethanol, and voila, laudanum. With its sweetly bitter aroma and clockwork capacity to render pain irrelevant. Laudanum was the original everything fix. It became a staple in middle-class medicine cabinets, nestled right between smelling salts and the family Bible. If your day's problems seemed too overwhelming, doctors were quick to trust laudanum to iron out the creases of your mind. Physicians championed laudanum as a miracle for migraines, menstrual cramps, coughs, digestive troubles, and, rather helpfully, a general sense of being alive in Victorian England. Today's wellness influencers have turmeric and adaptogenic mushrooms. Victorians had morphine cocktails. The side effect? Well, you might sleep through your existential crisis, or any crisis at all, really. The Victorians were a practical people. If you were up at night with a sore tooth, you could slip a spoonful of laudanum under your tongue and drift blissfully away, perhaps to awaken fully restored. Or not at all. A minor oversight in the quest for serenity. Babies, too, weren't left out. Laudanum mixtures, coolly labelled soothing syrups, were administered to soothe infantile fussiness. As for balance and moderation, let's say the Victorians were operating under the guiding principle of, if some is good, more must be better. But laudanum wasn't just for private suffering. It shaped the very pulse of Victorian society. Its writers, artists, and thinkers. The stuff floods the pages of classics. Samuel Taylor Coleridge famously wrote Kubla Khan in an opium-infused reverie, giving posterity a glimpse of dreams filtered through an amber haze. Elizabeth Barrett Browning credited laudanum with keeping her alive through chronic illness, and Wilkie Collins likely wrote entire chapters while floating several inches above the furniture. Through their laudanum-glazed lenses, the Victorians peered into new creative dimensions, even as their bodies buckled under the drug's relentless grip. Of course, the honeymoon couldn't last forever. Casual dependence crept into addiction, sometimes subtly, sometimes with a tragic, tabloid-worthy crash. Middle-class matrons were among the quiet addicts, with respectable women making up a large percentage of Victorian laudanum users. Social taboos around alcohol didn't stop these women from quietly sipping their laudanum tonic with afternoon tea, numbing the anxieties of family and rigid social mores at the cost of their health and, in some cases, their lives. But the real brilliance of laudanum lay in the gulf between what was promised and what was delivered. Advertisements fluttered through the pages of medical journals and women's magazines, cheerfully hailing laudanum as the solution to sleepless nights, toothaches, heartbreak, and hysteria. Meanwhile, the bodies piled up in doctors' ledgers and long whispered obituaries. Society would eventually awaken from its intoxicated haze, shocked at the true cost of their trusty tincture. But in the heyday of laudanum, that reckoning seemed as distant as the next day's hangover. So next time you see a juice bar peddling something called a detox elixir, take a moment for silent reflection on history. For all our modern quirks and fads, few can compete with the Victorians' devotion to getting through the day, come what may, with a dose of their favourite liquid courage, laudanum, the ultimate Victorian wellness shot. Feeling a little pressure upstairs? Never fear. Some doctors believe a little hole in your skull will let the bad thoughts out. It's DIY mental health, with carpentry tools. Let's rewind to a time before Xanax ads and mindfulness apps, way back to the Neolithic era. Imagine an ancient human, frazzled by, say, saber-toothed tiger attacks and cave-drawing deadlines. What's a proto-person to do? According to archaeological evidence, the answer was apparently, grab a sharp rock and drill a neat little hole in your skull. Not to sound judgy, but that's a pretty aggressive approach to stress management. Fast forward several millennia, and the practice of trepanning, or trepanation, if you're trying to impress someone at a medieval dinner party, was still somehow hanging on. From Egyptian healers to medieval barber surgeons, plenty of folks seem convinced that opening up the cranium would cure headaches, epilepsy, depression, and even cases of being possessed by vapors. In retrospect, it's an extreme way to open your mind. Modern science, for the record, recommends against unsupervised skull drilling. But for most of human history, the theory behind trepanning was bizarrely straightforward. If your brain feels crowded with spirits, stress, or sinister humours, why not give all that negativity a handy exit ramp? Let the demons out, they'd say. Though, as far as we know, no one ever reported seeing a stress demon crawl out and slither off through the nearest grassy field. To their credit, ancient trepanners weren't total quacks. Some patients did live. There's archaeological proof, healed skulls and all. Perhaps lacking anesthesia and antibiotics, their bar for success was liberally low. Anybody not immediately dying received a hearty, well done. Still, the idea persisted for centuries, leaving generations of anxious folk with a literal hole where their problems used to be. Jump ahead to the swinging 1960s, when everything old was new again. From lava lamps to, yes, trepanning. Some counterculture enthusiasts, most notably an eccentric Dutchman named Bart Hughes, revived skull drilling as the ultimate consciousness-raising hack. His pitch, boring a hole in the head increases brain blood volume, which, according to 0 peer-reviewed studies, allows for heightened awareness and stress relief. Hughes even documented the process, scalpels and all, fueling a small but devoted following of amateur cranial carpenters. Perhaps you're wondering, what does actual science say about all this? Spoiler alert, it's less than enthusiastic. Neurologists warn that, while trepanning might relieve pressure from certain traumatic injuries, with the help of surgeons and sterile tools, the supposed mental health benefits belong squarely in the realm of historic curiosity. The risks, hemorrhage, infection, death, tend to outweigh any placebo buzz one might get from a breezier skull. Even so, trepanning refuses to fade away completely. there remain a handful of diehards, often on the very fringes of alternative medicine, promoting it as an ancient wisdom suppressed by Big Pharma. For those playing the home version of this game, please, don't. In the end, what can we take away? Human beings will go to staggering lengths in pursuit of peace of mind, from meditation retreats to, apparently, homemade head holes. There's a certain dark comedy in our willingness to try literally anything for relief, from the spiritual to the surgical, from scented candles to the power drill aisle at the hardware store. Maybe that's the real lesson of trepanning. Not that it works, it doesn't, but that it's a weird, roundabout monument to our centuries-old anxiety and our eternal hope that there's a quick fix, if only we're bold, or bonkers, enough to try it. For now, rest assured, you can leave your power tools in the garage and your skull unperforated. There are easier ways to let off steam. Expect your doctor's comforting words to sound a lot like "bite down on this" or "hold still, this'll just sting for a fortnight." Empathy is whispered by the nurse, who has seen too much and is just here for the laudanum. In the hallowed halls of the Victorian infirmary, emotional candour is something to be left at the door, alongside your muddy boots and any wishful hopes for painless treatment. The doctor, a venerable figure habitually dusted with chalk and the faint smell of carbolic, sees the patient not as a vessel of anxieties, but as so much gristle to be prodded, stitched, or reprimanded. Should you let slip a groan or, God forbid, a tear, expect the reassuring pat of a calloused hand, followed rapidly by a stern lecture on the virtues of fortitude, followed by a truly lamentable attempt at a joke about Florence Nightingale and the Battle of Balaclava. A glimmer of sympathy might flicker in those tired eyes, but much like a comet, it passes swiftly and is never spoken of again. Medical wisdom of this age demands not delicate concern, but hearty stoicism. When your leg is mangled or your spirits low, it is not the time for comforting platitudes. Rather, it is the hour for a rousing speech on the merits of toughening up and thinking of England. The patient's pain, it seems, is at best a side note in the opera of Victorian healthcare. One is expected to bear the brunt of both procedure and prognosis, with the same composure one might have when facing a brisk wind off the Thames. Chin high, expectations low. The nurse, meanwhile, floats about the ward with a resigned air. She is your silent confidant, the person who will surreptitiously slide an extra pillow beneath your throbbing head, or tighten the bandages with a deftness born of repetition and a robust disregard for official protocol. Her bedside manner, unlike the doctor's, is couched in small mercies. Cool water placed at arm's reach, a muttered warning when the doctor is in a mood, or a wedge of pilfered bread pressed into your hand while no one is looking. She has the look of someone who's wrestled both cholera and rowdy orderlies, and won each time. If she offers you advice, heed it. You'll find more genuine sentiment in her three-word mutterings than a library of physicianly reassurances. Of course, the real charm of the Victorian bedside manner lies in the layers of practiced indifference that have accumulated like soot on a London chimney. A visitor, uninitiated in these traditions, might balk at the seemingly brutal efficiency of diagnosis and dismissal. You'll live, at least until tomorrow's rounds. Next. But behind these gruff exteriors hides a peculiar species of care, one born not of sentimentality, but of survival. By urging you to keep calm and carry on, your doctor is, in his disjointed fashion, preparing you for a rapidly changing and sometimes indifferent world. It's what passes for encouragement when miracle cures are mostly whiskey and hope. Yet, on rare occasions, a streak of tenderness peeks through the bombast. Perhaps the doctor lingers a moment longer before leaving your bedside, arching an eyebrow as if asking after your spirits without ever breaking his stony silence. The nurse might fetch a discarded newspaper, tattered but readable, and leave it within reach, her form of saying, "You're not alone." Such gestures, however understated, are the lifeblood of the Victorian ward. Simple, practical, and all the more profound for being unexpected. So if you find yourself under the care of a doctor with a particularly stiff upper lip, do not mistake the absence of soft words for a lack of concern. In this world, compassion is worn like a hidden medal, rarely displayed, but always close to the heart. Germ theory is still a rumour, so surgical tools are wiped on the doctor's pants, and everyone agrees water is for weaklings. You gain a new respect for soap, if only anyone suggested using it. In the bustling halls of late 19th century hospitals, the crisp scent of disinfectant is still several Nobel Prizes away. Instead, the dominant aroma is more unwashed ambition than sterile environment. Surgeons swagger into the operating theatre, trailing plumes of cigar smoke, and nurses hand them instruments with all the concern of someone passing the TV remote. The idea that invisible specks might be plotting your downfall is, frankly, laughable. Disease comes from drafts and bad humours, not from anything you can't see, which suits everyone just fine. Cleanliness, for the moment, is a personal quirk, like wearing shoes to bed or putting ketchup on fish. The leading minds of the day are, understandably, sceptical about this whole microbe business. Louis Pasteur is still mulling things over with his wine in France. And Joseph Lister, yes, of Listerine fame, has barely started to annoy everyone with his talk of antiseptics. Until then, a good rinse, possibly of the whiskey variety, and a brisk brushing off will suffice before plunging your hands into a patient's open abdomen. If anything, a bit of visible blood on your cuffs is a sign of experience. You're not an amateur, you just performed 3 amputations before lunch. Soap exists, of course. Big lumpy bars of yellow-brown tallow, good for scrubbing stains out of overalls, and maybe for lathering before Sunday church, but rarely for a quick hand wash between surgeries. Hands that are too clean raise suspicions. What are you hiding, exactly? Even among the progressive crowd, cleanliness is seen as something for hypochondriacs and fussy foreigners. Real physicians can weather any contagion with a stiff upper lip and perhaps a small glass of laudanum. Professional etiquette dictates that if you do wash your hands, you certainly don't talk about it. Hands are for shaking, not scrubbing. If you insist on a dip in tepid water, just make sure it's after you've lanced a few boils. There's nothing like a bit of honest pus to keep the skin supple. The sinks, where they exist, are mostly decorative. Most water is destined for tea, or possibly to splash in the face of a fainting medical student. Of course, it isn't just the doctors. Nurses have their own anti-hygiene rituals. Caps and aprons are spotless, but only in the sense that stains are uniform. Bandages are repurposed, sometimes as handkerchiefs, sometimes as makeshift slings for the next patient in line. If the truth about germs is out there, it's probably hiding beneath the ancient linoleum floor, petrified in a coal dust tomb. Meanwhile, lurking just beyond the lamplit wards, an evolutionary arms race rages quietly. Bacteria and viruses do their business among the wound dressings and surgical trays, cheering on yet another successful infection. Every unwashed hand is a welcome mat. The survivors, those few patients who march out with all their limbs and faculties, are either incredibly lucky or must have the immune system of a particularly robust mule. And woe to the hospital porter who tries to sweep up the filth. The dust is not just dust. It's generations of infection, layered like the rings of a particularly unfortunate tree. Pathogens from last winter's outbreak nestle beside the remnants of spring's ill-conceived experimental operations. Still, nobody bats an eye. This is the golden age of medicine, and everyone is too busy congratulating themselves on the wonders of modern progress to notice that half the patients leave sicker than they arrived. Only later, much, much later, will those same hospitals hang little plaques extolling the brave pioneers of hygiene. For now, however, their approach can be summed up best by the common phrase of the day: hand washing, that's for sissies. And so, the legend of the unwashed surgeon continues, soap sitting quietly on the sidelines, waiting, patiently, to save the day. Medication could be anything the pharmacist had in the back room, as long as it was strong, bitter, or several shades of radioactive. If you're lucky, it might also be mostly gin. Suddenly, gin and tonic for a fever makes an odd sort of historical sense. Now, imagine you're strolling into a Victorian apothecary, coughing into a kerchief, lace-trimmed of course, and hoping for something to ease a fever. The pharmacist, resplendent in a waistcoat and fully unbothered by the concept of clinical trials, slides a blue glass bottle across the counter. It whispers with promises, "Cough remedy." The label declares, then, in much smaller print, 75% gin, may also improve dancing. In fact, if you were ill in Victorian Britain, there was a good chance your medicine was the sort of thing your grandmother would have stashed under the sink. The logic was simple. If you can't cure an illness, at least make everyone too drunk to care. This was an era before the FDA, before anything resembling a controlled substance, and long before the concept of side effects meant anything more than might temporarily turn you purple. The over-the-counter scene was a riot of colourful concoctions, health tonics, elixirs, and universal cures. If it fizzed, burned, or made you see God's own colour palette, it was medicine. The Victorians had a fondness for compounds we'd now use to strip paint: mercury for syphilis, arsenic for stomach troubles, chloroform for anyone not quite lively enough. But above all, Victorians trusted booze. Gin, in particular, was the Swiss Army knife of medical marvels. A toddy for a cold, a nip for the nerves, a bathtub's worth for everything else. Children? Smaller dose. Babies? Teeny tiny dram, obviously. Calm the little ones with a drop of Mother's Helper, chirped advertisements, right before the infants passed out, and the adults congratulated themselves on their ingenuity. Gin attained such medicinal popularity that the entire public soon had medicinal needs. Cough, gin, scurvy, gin, mixed with tonic, the medicine in question being quinine, to fend off malaria, which was a real worry if you were a colonial official or just particularly allergic to gentle summer breezes. The British Empire was, in many ways, built on quinine cocktails. The magic prescription pad did not limit itself to gin alone. Other wondrous remedies included laudanum, a delightful blend of alcohol and opium, doctor's orders, cocaine drops for toothache, and heroin cough syrup for those persistent winter maladies. Children's teething products, smothered in morphine. It's difficult to say what worked more effectively, the medicines, or the fact that everyone was stupefied into a sort of cheerful, daydreamy indifference. Skeptical. The Victorians were too, but in a world before reliable antibiotics or X-rays, options were thin. Gulping gin for the sniffles must have seemed reasonable when the alternative was being bled by leeches or submitting to a rest cure involving 3 weeks in a dark room with boiled mutton. At least gin tasted vaguely of juniper and not hopelessness. Despite their dubious chemistry, some of these concoctions did have a noticeable effect. Mainly, they made you care a great deal less about your symptoms. Gin didn't shrink tumours, but it might make you temporarily forget you had them, or convince you to dance on tables, whichever came first. In summary, The next time a Victorian drama features a frail heroine mixing her powder with a stiff G&T, you can rest assured the scriptwriters have done their homework. Sometimes, history is not only stranger than fiction, it's considerably more fun at parties. And should you ever invent a time machine, remember, the best pharmacists of the 1800s were equal parts chemist, bartender, and wild optimist. Cheers. Victorian hospitals are loud, chaotic, and mostly smell like sawdust and agony. Nurses sprint past with buckets. Surgeons work, sleeves rolled up, whistling off-key. You try not to make eye contact with the amputated limbs in the corner. This isn't the white-walled, sterile sanctum you might picture today. It's a world of constant motion and muffled groans, where the echo of boots on old floorboards competes with the shriek of a bone saw. The air is thick, not just with the sharp tang of carbolic acid, but also the sweat of the living and the fear of the soon-to-be not living. If you're unlucky enough to wind up here, you're forced to confront 1,000 tiny details your brain will desperately want to block out. The patient swaddled in blood-stiffened linens, the gory parade of amputees, the nurse with trembling hands trying to balance professionalism and panic. The doctors, men in ink-stained vests and stained sleeves, thrive in the chaos, armed with little more than rudimentary instruments and an outsized confidence in their own recommendations. They'll assure you, with all the solemnity of a priest, that your best hope is immediate amputation. Anesthetics are, if you're lucky, chloroform or ether, but just as often it's a gulp of gin and something to bite down on. The saw, the knife, and a pair of unwashed hands. Surgery is a spectacle. Students jostle for a glimpse, standing on tiptoe, eager for a close-up of a textbook case, or a textbook disaster. Overcrowding is the norm. There aren't enough beds, so cots and stretchers push right up against each other. Privacy is a concept for ghosts, not patients. Thin curtains do little to block out the sounds, and even less to contain the infection. Sepsis, that invisible, grim reaper, makes the rounds between beds as efficiently as any nurse. Wounds that might have healed elsewhere invariably fester here. The hospital's best intentions feel as cruel as the disease. Who keeps this place from boiling over? The nurses. Grimy aprons, faces set with determination or deep fatigue. They carry chamber pots and water jugs, bark orders, and offer rare mercy. A damp rag, a gentle touch, a whispered joke, if you're lucky. Florence Nightingale's shadow looms over them all, but the average Victorian nurse must forge her own sense of order from chaos, grit her teeth at the screams, and remember which patient is most likely to survive the night. Noises become a kind of language, the clatter of tools dropped in a pan, someone done for now. The single, boiling shriek, another patient learning what sterile technique means by its absence. In the corner, stories unfold and end in the span of a gasp. A soldier's leg, gone. A child's fever, rising. A mother praying for morphine. Yet, amid this carnage, there is also hope, and even, incredibly, a few happy endings. Miracles, when they happen, are small. An infection that somehow resolves. A fever that breaks at dawn. A letter from home for the lonely. The hospital is haunted, not just by the ghosts of those who didn't make it, but also by the resilience of those who did. Each scar, each patched up limb or stitched over wound is a testament to the strange alchemy of suffering and survival. As you stagger out again, if you ever do, you bear traces of this place. Scars, stories, and a deep gratitude for every step taken away from the ward. Healing or haunting. In Victorian hospitals, there's rarely a clean line between the two. The hospital is a crossroads, and everyone who passes through it leaves changed, whether by savagery, by salvation, or both. For everything from broken bones to mysterious aches, Nothing says good medicine like a swift amputation. There's no such thing as minor surgery. Blink and you're down a toe. Blink twice and you're part of the furniture. In the grand tapestry of medical history, few remedies boast the elegance and, let's say, boldness of amputation. Where other treatments tend to, inconveniently, involve patience, careful diagnosis, and follow-up appointments, amputation offers the doctor a chance to demonstrate both decisiveness and, assuming their hand is steady, a flair for carpentry. Why tiptoe around a wobbly limb when you can simply remove it? After all, if you don't notice your leg is missing until the doctor's halfway out the door, that's just good efficiency. Consider this. In hospitals of yesteryear, amputation wasn't reserved for the battlefield. No, it was a multi-tool. Ingrown toenail, chop it off, stubbed your pinky finger. No use growing attached. If you showed up to the clinic with anything short of perfect health, there was a fair chance you could leave dozens of pounds lighter. Some practitioners treated the scalpel like an eraser for the body's complaints, convinced that if you eliminate the source of pain, along with several unrelated appendages, you would invariably feel better, or at least have less to complain about. Doctors of this bold tradition understood a fundamental truth. It's impossible for a patient to say, "The pain's in my foot," once they no longer have a foot. Tidiness was key. Pain persisted. Clearly a rogue bit of limb had slipped through the cracks. Back under the knife you went, the whole procedure cloaked in clinical optimism and perhaps the lingering odour of brandy for both patient and surgeon. But of course, not all amputations were equally swift or equally survivable. In the era before anaesthetic, the surgeon's speed wasn't just admired, it was absolutely critical. The less time spent darting steel, since time see through flesh, the better. Records set for 19th century amputations remain unmatched. Full limbs separated in under 2 minutes, somewhat less if you skipped the pleasantries. Some surgeons prided themselves on being able to remove a leg, tie off the arteries, and offer a hearty handshake before the patient properly registered what they'd agreed to. It was, in a sense, the original fast food experience. Such haste had its drawbacks. In the fog of speed, tools and appendages had a way of getting mixed up. There's more than one account of the surgeon who, having dispatched a patient's leg onto the pile, inadvertently included his own assistant's thumb. This was generally regarded as an occupational hazard, a small price to pay for progress. The psychological aspect, too, mustn't be ignored. There's a peculiar camaraderie in a limb loss support group, particularly when half the town had their appendages removed by the same enthusiastic doctor. You too became less an expression of surprise, more a greeting. By the time patients realised how quick the whole business had been, they were already deep into strategies for balancing on fewer limbs and quietly relieved not to have been left behind altogether. Modern medicine has, for the most part, moved beyond such impulsive lopping, but the legend of the quick amputation endures. When in doubt, just cut it out. The rallying cry of a more decisive, if anatomically diminishing, age. While today's practitioners are less likely to remove an arm at the first sign of discomfort, they owe a debt to those bold surgeons for reminding us that medical efficiency, like so many things, is best appreciated from a safe distance, with both hands, ideally, still attached. So, next time you visit your doctor for a sore knee, and leave with a reassuring pat on the back, rather than a missing limb, spare a thought for history, and count your blessings, and your toes. Feeling blue? The latest theory is that you're just thinking wrong. Positive vibes only, unless those vibes are coming from a haunted mirror. But there's a person somewhere, probably on a yoga retreat in Sedona, who will tell you that all of life's problems can be solved simply by outthinking them. Oh, you're stressed about rent. Just manifest more rent money. Worried about a looming asteroid? Banish those negative thoughts and the asteroid will get bored and wander off. You can picture this person, can't you? They have impeccable skin, never lose their luggage, and talk about Mercury retrograde with an intensity usually reserved for hostage negotiations. And so enters the cult of pure thought healing. Not just positive thinking. That's passé. This is industrial grade, weaponized optimism, the superhero cape version of it's all in your head. You don't have indigestion. You have a limiting belief about onions. You're not aching because you sat on Zoom for 8 hours. You're failing to align your quantum chakras. These days, if you express doubt or pessimism, you're reprimanded as if you just sneezed on the cake at a first grader's birthday party. Bad thoughts are contagious, correction, dangerous. There's a whole micro-industry dedicated to tracking down low-vibe people, as if skepticism were a communicable disease. They probably have sniffer dogs for cynicism. This phenomenon isn't just a harmless bit of magical thinking. It's transformed into an entire ecosystem. Self-help empires, seminars with glowing hashtags, influencers whispering into expensive microphones about cognitive realignment, all united in the promise that your broken leg will heal if you just reframe it as an opportunity to grow. Picture a coach earnestly explaining that your broken arm is just the universe encouraging you to become ambidextrous. Of course, the roots of this are old. Norman Vincent Peale, The Secret, and every self-help book with gold embossed letters. But social media supercharged everything. There are now accounts dedicated exclusively to thought detoxing. One influencer recommends imaginary tinfoil hats to keep out toxic narratives. Another offers premium downloadable meditations, $99.99 for platinum frequency access. Still, there's a comforting appeal to the idea that our universe is a wish-granting robot, if only we push the right buttons in our brains. If you think the right thoughts, health and happiness will materialize, somehow. You can almost hear your insurance company sighing in relief. Why cover dental work when you can just meditate your enamel back? But if positive thinking is such a miracle cure, you wonder what happens when life stubbornly refuses to cooperate. Spoiler, it's your fault. You didn't focus the energy at the right frequency. Or you read Mercury's chart upside down. Or your chakra opener kit was shipped by FedEx instead of DHL. It couldn't possibly be random bad luck, systemic issues, or just, biology. Even as we chuckle, there's a subtler harm here. The "your mind controls your health" narrative buries genuine suffering under a pile of guilt and glitter. It turns every setback into a personal failure of attitude. If you don't recover, it's not because the illness is tough. It's because you didn't flex your positivity muscles hard enough. That's not medicine. That's gaslighting, but with more incense. So yes, cultivate gratitude and optimism where you can. But if anyone tells you that your chronic migraine is just poor visualizing, or that depression is cured by mood boards, you have my permission to answer with pure, unfiltered skepticism, preferably accompanied by a haunted stare in the nearest mirror. Because when it comes down to it, reality is complicated. And sometimes the sanest thought you can have is, no, it's not all in my head. In Victorian England, see one, do one, teach one is real. You might have a gaggle of eager students watching your minor surgery. Some of them might even be sober. Medical education in the Victorian era is nothing short of a spectacle, and the atmosphere of a teaching hospital resembles equal parts circus, classroom, and battlefield. Students, typically young men from privileged backgrounds, patrol the wards in clusters, trailing after senior physicians. Their approach is rarely subtle and often heralded by a commotion. Footsteps echo down corridors, hushed giggles, and whispered bets about which unfortunate patient will become today's impromptu demonstration. In this world, theoretical knowledge takes a firm back seat to hands-on experience, often at the expense of patient privacy and comfort. The sheer enthusiasm of Victorian medical students can be both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, their curiosity pushes the boundaries of contemporary science. On the other, it often means patients find themselves no longer individuals, but rather living textbooks. In the cramped surgery theatre, gas lamps flicker over rows of tightly packed benches, each packed with students, some diligently taking notes, others covertly passing flasks or scribbling caricatures of pompous professors. On a good day, their focus sharpens at the moment of incision, eyes locked onto the surgeon's hands, hoping to witness the rare bloom of brilliance, or, just as thrilling for them, a memorable mistake. The teaching method is brutally direct. The apprentice surgeon is expected to perform on command, sometimes with little more preparation than having observed a procedure once or twice. You there? Yes, you. Time to take out the appendix. With hands trembling, hopefully from nerves, not last night's gin, the aspiring doctor steps forward. The patient, uncomfortably conscious of the drama surrounding their own misery, endures an education in humility, their consent implied rather than gentled given. An operation might unfold as a public lesson, peppered with running commentary from the surgeon and awkward, halting questions from the students lucky or unlucky enough to be called to the operating table. Outside the theatre, the hospital's wards offer another kind of education. Here, students learn their bedside manner or lack thereof, piecing together scraps of clinical wisdom with snippets of gossip and advice overheard from overworked nurses. Examine, examine, examine becomes the refrain, pushing students to prod, palpate, and peer at patients from every possible angle. Sometimes, this relentless curiosity yields genuine insight. A diagnosis ingeniously made, a treatment suggested that glimmers with promise. Other times, it produces only bruised dignity and chafed tempers, especially among those patients jaded by endless parade of promising young men. Social class and status inevitably colour every interaction. Wealthier students laud their knowledge and connections over their peers, while the offspring of working-class families must prove themselves twice over, first in their studies, then in the social gauntlet that the hospital presents. Women, meanwhile, are seldom seen at all, except, perhaps, in the rare progressive institutions, or as subjects of whispered rumours, someone's daughter, someone else's scandal. For most, medicine remains a man's world, brash, competitive, and utterly unapologetic. And yet, for all the chaos and occasional indignities, these years form a crucible in which great physicians are forged. Lifelong friendships and rivalries begin here, in the rowdy camaraderie of exam cramming, late-night dissections, and the shared responsibility of wrangling new medical knowledge into practice. In the end, every student must navigate the same daunting path, from wide-eyed observer to shaky-handed apprentice, and finally to the confident healer, one who in time will have their own gaggle of students, eager to see, to do, and perhaps to teach. Gran has a recipe for everything. Unfortunately, all of them involve mustard, goose fat, or alarming amounts of vinegar. They might leave you smelling like a salad, but you'll survive. Hopefully. I have yet to see a single malady that Gran couldn't cure, or at least threaten, using something she found in her larder. Got a cough? That's a spoonful of mustard in hot water, chased by a brisk rub-down with goose fat. Bruised your shin? Don't bother with ice. Vinegar, wrapped in yesterday's newspaper, is guaranteed to draw out the bad humours. And if you have the audacity to catch a cold, Gran will practically chase you around with her infamous sweat-it-out stew, a potent brew that closely resembles industrial paint remover, with a faint aftertaste of the French countryside. But beneath the comic chaos of home remedies is a deeper truth. When illness strikes, the family becomes an emergency medical committee, convening around the dining table armed with jars, compresses, and the sort of sheer determination only witnessed on baking shows during crunch time. Everyone, it seems, has a secret weapon. Aunt Mabel swears by boiled onions strapped to the feet. Uncle Frank is a proponent of hot gin, medicinal for adults only, of course. Aunts and uncles compete to offer advice, often at deafening volume, each remedy more outlandish than the last. Children quickly learn that being unwell is a fast-track ticket to the kind of attention reserved for minor royalty, at least until someone trots out the cod liver oil. Suddenly, there's a sense of solidarity among kids everywhere. Best to recover swiftly, lest you face the spoon and its oily, dubious cure-all. In these moments, the living room transforms into a combination of battlefield hospital and slapstick sitcom. Old towels appear from nowhere. Spoons of dubious liquids are met with suspicious side-eyes and exaggerated gags. Gran lectures about the dangers of modern medicine, citing obscure relatives who live to 98 on nothing but dandelion tea, daily walks, and a general distrust of doctors. No one knows whether to believe her, but no one's quite brave enough to argue. The rituals are familiar, the soft murmur of reassurance, the gentle pat of a hand, the blanket tucking that could withstand gale-force winds. But it's not just about the cure. There's a kind of magic in it. The laughter that bubbles up when the youngest cousin gets mustard on the dog's nose, or the familial chorus as everyone demands, "How are you feeling now?" for the 80th time that day. Behind the slapstick treatments lies a well-worn wisdom, the reminder that while the remedies might not always work, love and care are the greatest salves. When you're bundled up, sipping hot lemon water laced with whatever the diagnosis, it's less about the cure and more about the comforting certainty that the whole family is rooting for you, even if they're also inflicting pickled onions and poultices along the way. Of course, by evening, the patient is usually better. Whether this is down to Gran's mustard poultice or the sheer terror of another spoonful, no one can say. But the ceremony ends the same way every time. A nod of satisfaction from the family medical committee and a light threat to bring out the big remedies next time, should sickness dare to return. Home remedies may be messy, peculiar, and occasionally pungent, but they're stitched into the fabric of family life. A reminder that healing comes not just from what's in the bottle or bowl, but from the hands that offer it and the hearts that care. And if nothing else, you'll always have a good story and a lasting scent of vinegar to remember. Dental work involves pliers and the promise of a strong drink afterward. Anesthesia. If you're lucky, unconsciousness will find you first. Now imagine waking up in the middle of the night in a drafty farmhouse. Your molar is pulsing. The pain radiates into your ear, up your jaw, taking on a life of its own. A small malevolent creature, sinking its claws deep into the nerve. You prod it with your tongue, hoping it was a bad dream. It isn't. The swelling in your cheek says, this is no simple irritation. In the world we live in now, a toothache isn't just a nuisance or an inconvenience to be fixed with a call to the dentist. No, now it's a sentence, an omen. The infection is already on the march, a hidden enemy tunneling toward your blood and bones. You might ask around in the village for remedies. Someone's grandmother offers clove oil, strong liquor, and a cold compress. These buy you hours if you're lucky, but everyone knows what comes next. The rumours run rampant. A farmer who tried to remove his own wisdom tooth with a rusty kitchen spoon. A mother whose jaw froze shut from the pain. A teenager feverish and lost to the world within days. The lesson is clear. Delay is deadly. By the time you present yourself to the only person with any experience, a veteran of the last days of the local dental office, now employing his tools out of necessity rather than expertise, dread is your constant companion. The tools on the table, pliers, a knife, a small file, are displayed like relics in a museum of suffering. You try not to look directly at them, focusing instead on the worn tabletop, on the promises murmured by those gathered in the next room, that it will be quick, that you'll thank them later, that people used to survive this kind of thing all the time. Your would-be dentist inspects the tooth with the thoroughness of a carpenter appraising a rotten beam. He grunts, shakes his head, and motions for you to open wider. There is a quick, businesslike exchange. Someone hands you a rag to bite down on. Someone else pours a generous finger of whiskey and presses it to your lips. The routine is humbling, primal, and terrifying. You sense, in this moment, the thin line we walk between comfort and calamity. You feel the first tug, an ancient pain that roots itself in your bones and will not be forgotten. The sound, metal grinding tooth, a sickening crunch, is something you know you'll hear when you close your eyes, again and again. The minutes crawl, the pain peaks, a blinding flash. Then, suddenly, the torment abates. The tooth, bloody and grotesque, is dropped onto a towel. Someone presses a ball of cloth to the gaping hole in your mouth. There's cheering as if you'd survived a battle. Applause from the crowd who waited long into the night. For a moment, the pain is background noise to the wave of relief that washes over you. You're left exhausted, trembling, both grateful and fundamentally changed. The ache will linger, a dull, pulsing memory, but you are alive. And that, in these times, is enough of a victory. Later, you wonder how much longer you can keep your remaining teeth. You vow to protect them with your life, to guard them as jealously as any store of food or firewood. After all, you now know, painfully well, that the line between a bother and a crisis, between nuisance and disaster, is just about as thin as the roots of a human tooth. If you'd like, I can further adjust the voice or details to better match specific elements from your transcripts. If you can bottle it, you can sell it. Big promises, bold labels, and absolutely no science. You put your trust, and a lot of your paycheck, in glass bottles of liquid hope. The age of the patent medicine. It was less a medical revolution and more a marketing miracle. No regulation, no standards, and definitely no need for clinical trials. It was the wild west of wellness, a world where the louder you shouted, the more you sold. Every apothecary's shelf shimmered with ornate bottles, each professing to be the cure. Headache, stomach ache, melancholia. There was a bottle for that. The bottles were mysterious and alluring, sporting names like Dr. Chillingsworth's Elixir of Vitality or Professor Phineas's Marvellous Tonic. Never mind what was in them. A good label and a glowing testimonial were all you needed. Newspapers and magazines of the day were splattered with advertisements. The copywriters behind these ads were, perhaps, the true magicians. They transformed snake oil into liquid gold with a turn of phrase, restores vigour to the feeblest soul, or guaranteed to banish all nervous afflictions. Testimonials poured in from satisfied customers who curiously all had the same loopy handwriting and home address as the patent medicine's proprietor. Every town had that one true believer, the person who swore by Dr. Woodruff's soothing syrup, unable or unwilling to make the connection between their chronic headaches and the suspiciously large amount of opium listed, sometimes, right on the label. Behind the curtain, patent medicine makers were chemists, showmen, and salesmen rolled into one. Their recipes were guarded secrets, and for good reason. Some relied on high doses of alcohol, others packed in potent doses of morphine or cocaine. Why did people feel better? The answer was equal parts pharmacology and placebo, and it was all perfectly legal. The labelling trickery was an art form unto itself. Exotic herbs and roots, animal extracts, electrical energy. If it sounded rare or mysterious, it found its way onto the bottle. The more outlandish, the better. The real trick was never to cure, just to keep you buying. Of course, beneath all the bombast was the simple human yearning for a quick fix. Doctors were expensive and hard to reach. Trust in normal medicine wasn't universal. Sometimes doctors did more harm than good. A brightly coloured bottle on a druggist's shelf offered certainty, a solution you could hold in your hand and swallow by the tablespoon. The ritual of unsealing a cork, pouring a bitter dose, and waiting for the promised transformation became a part of daily life. Added bonus: taking your medicine was often the social highlight of the day. In time, the consequences became hard to ignore. Some potions left people worse off than when they started. Others proved deadly. Government crackdowns were slow in coming, but eventually there was a reckoning. Laws regulated what could be advertised and what had to be listed as an ingredient. The golden age of the secret potion faded, replaced by slightly more honest remedies. Still, the allure never truly evaporated. Even today, echoes of the old patent medicine carnival survive. The labels are glossier, the ingredients more natural, and the promises just a little more subtle. We still crave a miracle in a jar, an easy answer, something mysterious that works because deep down, it must. These glass bottles of hope, both then and now, say less about science and more about us, about our willingness to believe, to try anything, to be dazzled by the promise of something miraculous. The names have changed, but people remain much the same, searching for that secret cure, tantalized by the possibility that just maybe, this bottle is the one that delivers. The Victorian birthing suite is, well, mostly just your bedroom, full of worried women and one skeptical house cat. There are more superstitions than medical advice, but if you survive, you're considered a minor miracle. Forget any images of a sanitized, softly lit hospital room. Here, the scent of lavender is meant to mask the realities of the ordeal, and the midwife's hands are clean only if she happened to avoid mucking out the family pigsty that morning. The phrase, "doctor on call," is more theoretical than practical. Many a woman would wait hours, sometimes days, for the town doctor to arrive, if he came at all. In his absence, the burden falls on the local midwife, your mother-in-law. Or, if things are truly bleak, the neighbour with strong nerves and a cast-iron stomach. But back to those superstitions. Before a single pang of labour hits, the room is already swirling with advice, both sage and utterly absurd. Some swear by tying red ribbons to the bedposts to ward off evil spirits. Others insist the windows must stay open, no matter the chill, so the bad air doesn't linger and threaten the newborn. If you're lucky, an Avra herbal concoction finds its way to your lips, promising to ease the pain, which, to everyone's disappointment, it rarely does. As contractions begin, the atmosphere in the room grows tense. Familiar faces hover, whispering prayers or bargains to the heavens. Food and drink are offered in regular intervals, mostly to distract you, since science hasn't caught up to pain relief yet. Some of these treatments involve curious recipes. Think warm ale, ginger tea, or, if someone's feeling experimental, a spoonful of brandy to steady the nerves. None of these do much, but the women fussing over you need to feel useful. If the birth progresses as it should, the midwife's role is mostly to offer reassurance, mop your brow, and remind you, in often blunt terms, that countless women have survived this before you. If things take a dangerous turn, that's when real fear sets in. Complications like breech births or heavy bleeding are met with desperate improvisation, a hastily boiled cloth, a whispered Hail Mary, or medical advice gleaned second-hand from a neighbour who once knew someone who'd seen a doctor. Meanwhile, the skeptical house cat stands guard at the foot of the bed, tail twitching. According to some, a cat in the room signals good luck. According to others, it's an omen of trouble. Either way, the cat seems mostly invested in keeping its distance from the chaos, save for an occasional sideways glance at the yowling, red-faced bundle of terror that will soon join the household. Should you and your child emerge from the ordeal more or less intact, the celebrations are oddly subdued, part relief, part exhaustion. Flowers might be set by your bedside, or a neighbour might drop in with stew and gossip. But the truth is, everyone knows childbirth is a thinly veiled gamble. Survival isn't assumed, it's earned. Of course, the battle isn't quite over. Recovery involves a round-the-clock rotation of aunties, sisters, and neighbours, each professing to know the quickest route to full health. Their remedies range from the sensible, rest and broth, to the outlandish, chicken feathers in your pillow, or sleeping with a silver spoon under your tongue. In the Victorian age, childbirth is the ultimate endurance test, trial by fire, and community spectacle all rolled into one. You earn your recovery in small, hard-won victories. The first day you sit up by yourself, the first time you can greet your baby with something approaching a smile. And, if you're wise, you keep at least one ribbon tied to your bedpost, just in case those spirits are the lingering type. If you're having a bad day, beware. Victorian mental health treatment favours ice baths, compulsory knitting, and a brisk walk around the gardens, or just permanent residency. Back in the 19th century, mental illness wasn't so much treated as it was contained. The archetypal image of the Grand Victorian Asylum, massive, solemn, with a punitive array of iron railings, was more institution than sanctuary. The asylums themselves looked like crossbreeds between cathedrals and prisons, which, depending on your diagnosis, was either a comforting sight or a warning. Arrival at one of these institutions typically involved a brisk assessment, often based more on social inconvenience than medical acumen. Hysteria, for women, could mean anything from postnatal depression to being too outspoken at dinner. Men, meanwhile, faced diagnoses ranging from melancholia to moral insanity, a term conveniently vague enough to cover everything from depression to excessive chess playing. Once admitted, therapy was a patchwork affair, heavy on routine and light on evidence. The cornerstone was what you might now call moral treatment. No, it didn't involve motivational quotes or yoga workshops, but rather endless tedium, making beds with military precision, sewing endless seams, and maintaining rigorous silence. A day jam-packed with calming labour was supposed to soothe the mind. Apparently, if you were busy enough folding laundry, you wouldn't have time for delusions. For those showing less willingness to embrace the joys of gardening or knitting, a menu of more direct interventions awaited. Doctors believed cold was both bracing and, somehow, clarifying. The infamous ice bath found its heyday here, not just a quick plunge, but sometimes hours, the more incorrigible patients left to chill while the doctor monitored for results, such as docility, shivering compliance, or simply a lack of further protesting. The Victorian physician's toolkit bristled with inventions that would now trigger multiple lawsuits. Rotating chairs, exactly as pleasant as they sound, spinning beds, and a variety of mechanical restraints. Everything engineered with the best of intentions and the absolute worst of outcomes. If the mind couldn't be soothed into submission, perhaps it could be restrained, stunned, or at the very least, thoroughly confused. Medication, as we understand it, hadn't quite been invented yet. Or rather, most attempts at chemical intervention were accidental overdoses or well-meaning poisonings, opiates, alcohol, or bromide mixtures. If it dulled the senses, it counted as treatment. If it didn't work, stronger doses were enthusiastically applied. For the wealthy, asylums could be surprisingly plush. Fee-paying guests enjoyed their own rooms and relative freedom, the kind of therapeutic environment where the tea was strong, the curtains heavy, and the staff quietly paid not to disclose the identity of their eccentric clientele. For the poor, amenities were in shorter supply: crowded wards, thin gruel, and the opportunity to enjoy one's psychosis with dozens of like-minded strangers, and far too little ventilation. And yet, for all this, some asylums offered a measure of kindness absent elsewhere. A few pioneering doctors, think moral reformists rather than mad scientists, genuinely advocated for empathy, meaningful work, and family visitation. The tragedy, of course, was that these ideas were the exception rather than the rule. If all else failed, one might simply become a permanent resident, because in Victorian mental health care, a cure often meant outliving your diagnosis, or failing that, becoming someone else's problem. Patients might linger for decades, outliving their admitting physicians, and sometimes even their own sanity. So, the next time your bad day brings you close to cracking, be glad your version of self-care doesn't involve compulsory needlework, freezing baths, or a brisk walk around a courtyard the size of a football pitch, under the watchful gaze of someone named Dr. Blythe, whose credentials, like his bedside manner, leave much to be desired. Epidemics are frequent, terrifying, and usually blamed on miasmas. Bad air, not bad decisions. Social distancing, more like everyone running to the countryside, then sneezing on each other at the next dinner party. Imagine the scene. It's the 19th century, and the streets are full of horse-drawn carriages, top hats, and that certain aromatic flavour wafting through the air. Your neighbour's child comes down with a raging fever. Is it scarlet fever, cholera, or just a Wednesday? Who can say? Medical science, still basically in its throw leeches at it and see what happens phase, had not yet figured out that invisible pathogens were a thing. So, cue the local authorities, who would swoop in, not with contact tracing or vaccines, but with barrels of vinegar for fumigating houses, and, occasionally, with optimism so contagious it could rival the pathogens themselves. Scarlet fever, also known as the deadly rash, was so common that parents would just add it to the checklist along with measles and chicken pox. Scarlet fever swept through households, sparing almost nobody, except for that one kid who simply never got sick, likely out of sheer contrariness. The signature symptoms: high fever, a sandpapery rash, and a tongue so red it was called strawberry tongue. Parents prescribed rest, tonics, and, for the lucky, a stay at the seaside. For the unlucky, there was always the local doctor who would either recommend bleeding or keeping the windows open. And always, plenty of fresh air, as if a nice breeze could waft away bacteria. Then came cholera, a disease that didn't gently knock, but rather barged in, upended the punch bowl, and ruined the party. Cholera killed quickly, often within hours, and it didn't care about your social status or the quality of your wig. Spreading through contaminated water, it turned out that the beloved communal water pump was, in fact, a roulette wheel of doom. But don't expect rapid reforms in waste management. The prevailing wisdom was to hang bags of herbs in your doorway, or burn sweet-smelling resins to fend off bad air, while the real culprit, sewage seeping into drinking water, went unexplored. In cities like London, cholera outbreaks became almost seasonal. People would swap tales of the latest outbreak the way we now discuss movie premieres. Did you hear? The Broad Street pump is cursed! Meanwhile, true heroes like Dr. Jon Snow, no, not that Jon Snow, tested the wild notion that maybe, just maybe, it was the water and not the weather. By mapping cases and yanking the handle off the now infamous pump, Snow saved lives and, with minimal drama, helped invent the field of epidemiology. What about smallpox, our perennial friend? While its pox-ridden visage haunted dreams, the invention of vaccination offered a glimmer of hope. Still, it was met with suspicion. Wasn't it unnatural to fight disease using pus from a cow? Why take a perfectly good cow and a perfectly healthy human and turn them into one confused, spotty mess? Some wondered. But the skeptics' grumbles faded as the cases dropped, slowly, stubbornly. Throughout all this, the wealthy preferred to escape risk by running to the countryside, where, in their grand estates, they unwittingly brought the germs with them. Dinner parties became hotbeds for exchange, not of witty repartee, but of microbes. Rural villagers, delighted to serve the big city folk, soon learned that alongside new fashions came new epidemics. Despite all the chaos and confusion, something remarkable began to happen. People talked. Stories spread, some true, some wildly fanciful. Each epidemic produced its own crop of tales, miraculous recoveries, herbal panaceas, mysterious survivors, and, inevitably, scapegoats, from foreign visitors to the town's favourite stray cats. But with every calamity, a sliver of understanding crept in, setting the stage for the slow, stubborn march toward public health reforms. And, eventually, sanity. So when you next hear someone wax nostalgic for simpler times, remember, those times came with a strong side of scarlet fever and cholera. And as for dinner parties, pass on the water and maybe skip the hugs. Victorian doctors are also great at euphemism, died of excitement, rage of the bowels, and anything else that sounds poetic but means we have no idea. Morbid, but at least they had fun with it. The death certificate was not only an official document, but, if you read closely between the lines, a platform for creative writing. Picture a doctor, quill in hand, squinting over their patient record, knowing full well that heart failure covers a multitude of clinical sins, but deciding instead to immortalize the dearly departed with something like succumbed to a surfeit of fish. Imagine the bewilderment of future genealogists. Did great-uncle Wilfred truly meet his end at the hands of a particularly belligerent trout? Or was he simply unlucky enough to pass in an era before cholesterol was a household term? The Victorians' underlying fear of the unexplainable seemed only to fuel this poetic obfuscation. Medicine, still in its awkward adolescence, could rarely provide neat causes for the myriad ways the human body might betray its owner. The lack of certainty birthed a lexicon of gentle avoidance, consumption, anything from tuberculosis to cancer, dropsy, congestive heart failure before it had a PR manager, and of course, the maddeningly vague debility, diagnosis code for he was old and then he wasn't. But make no mistake, these flowery phrases carried social heft. If you were wealthy, your death by melancholia suggested tragic sophistication, a Byronic spiral away from this cruel world, rather than, say, a slow demise, from clinical depression left untreated. The poor were more likely assigned exhaustion or want of nourishment, their endings less a story, more a statistic. The language of death certificates reflected what society could bear to acknowledge, and positively scandalous diagnoses, venereal diseases, suicide, alcoholism, were hidden beneath ever more creative prose. Died of intemperance, for example, peacefully swaddled the truth in a layer of Victorian dignity, as if a fondness for gin might be a passing quirk rather than a societal woe. One imagines doctors grimacing as they wrote, knowing they walked a line between medical honesty and the preservation of family reputation. This ritual of euphemism was not solely for the bereaved families. It was also for the living, an act of collective self-deception that life, with enough poetry, could be made more bearable. It offered, in the face of mortality, a chance for one last edit of the personal narrative, a posthumous PR rebranding. After all, if one must go, why not do so with a flourish? Died of a visitation by God is at least more memorable than succumbed to influenza. Today, with our forthright cardiac arrest and acute myocardial infarction, it sometimes seems we've lost the art of the medical euphemism, though we've compensated with endless acronyms and digital checkboxes. The Victorian death certificate, for all its vagueness, has a weird literary charm. A catalogue of old fears, odd convictions, and a hopeful belief that language can outwit the ultimate finality. In the end, what's recorded on that elegant slip of paper tells as much about the culture and anxieties of the era as it does about the individual's demise. Perhaps that's the real cause of death for so many Victorians. Poetic license. When medicine fails, which it does often, you can always bank on a trendy séance or funeral with all the latest hearses. At least you'll go out in style or possibly spend eternity listening to someone recite bad poetry. Let's be honest. Death has always been a lucrative business. The moment your pulse gives out, an entire ecosystem springs into action. Well-dressed funeral directors, eternally cheerful flower, salespeople, and self-proclaimed mediums with business cards that still smell faintly of incense. The funeral home becomes a showroom with glossy pamphlets touting mahogany coffins with memory foam pillows. You might as well be comfortable, even if you're not around to complain. There's a menu of afterlife options so elaborate it would put a luxury car dealership to shame. Grief, as it turns out, is a marketer's dream demographic, desperate, frazzled, and just irrational enough to spring for the deluxe, angelic send-off package. There's a coffin for every taste and budget. Vegan wicker for the eco-conscious, mirror-polished black for those with a flair for the dramatic, and plain pine for the minimalists or the tight-fisted. And don't forget about the optional upgrades. Engraved handles, silk wrappings, playlists for the dearly departed. And if you really want to leave a mark, biodegradable confetti cannons for that final farewell burst. Who says you can't make an exit? Then there's the spiritual upsell. Mediums, clairvoyants, mystics, each promising a hotline to the other side. Where science offers silence, these entrepreneurs offer hope, with a price tag. Place a call to Aunt Edna, and if the signal is strong, she might send back cryptic messages. I see a teapot and a small dog. Does that mean anything? that can be interpreted to fit anything from a lost family heirloom to your neighbour's new haircut. The showmanship is half the fun. Curtains twitch, candles flicker, and the medium's eyes roll back with so much gusto you'd swear they were auditioning for a furniture store mattress commercial. It's not just about grief. It's about spectacle. Funerals, once quiet affairs, are now themed events. Did Uncle Bob love fishing? There's a casket that doubles as a boat. Was Grandma partial to disco? Prepare for her grand exit on a rotating platform with a fog machine. Mourners are less likely to leave with a sense of solemnity than with the distinct impression they've been to a product launch. Everyone gets a branded handout, a commemorative fridge magnet, maybe even a discount coupon for the next séance. Of course, we can't overlook the fine print. Every guaranteed connection to the other side comes with a disclaimer in tiny, polite Gothic font, suggesting results may vary. And no, there are no refunds, not even for the dearly departed. The afterlife, it seems, runs on a strict no-returns policy. As for the living, you're left with the clarity that in death, as in life, there's always someone ready to upsell you. Pearly gates, after all, don't swing open free of charge. So, if you can't beat death, at least consider out-marketing it, whether through velvet-lined coffins, poetic eulogies that wander suspiciously close to stand-up comedy, or mediums who throw in a reading of your spirit aura for a small additional fee. Your final moments might just be your splashiest. Let's hope eternity comes with a mute button, just in case the afterlife poetry readings are open mic night, every night. If you do happen to survive, your doctor will stop by, tip his hat, and claim all the credit, no matter how many toes you're missing. It's a healing process that leans hard into gratitude and denial. Your hospital room, likely shared with several equally unlucky souls, is more of a chaotic theatre than a sanctuary for rest. Curtains are drawn, privacy is optional, and the chorus of coughing, moaning, and the occasional grotesque hacking is just the ambient soundscape one learns to tune out. The good news? The doctor's rounds, complete with a retinue of awestruck students, provide your morning's only real entertainment. Today, if you're conscious enough, you might even overhear yourself described as an uncommonly robust example, which, in Victorian medical code, means you haven't died of sepsis yet. When it comes to aftercare in this era, optimism is a fully loaded, double-edged sword. You'll be prescribed as much fresh air as your lungs can bear, sturdy broth made from what was left at the butcher's, and the unwavering belief that cheerfulness is the best medicine. Because that's what's left after the supplies have run out. Your nurse, part Florence Nightingale and part Field Marshal, will keep you on a strict regimen. Rise early, resist complaining, and never under any circumstances glance beneath your bandages. Pain relief. Well, let's just say morphine shortages are a tale as old as time, and laudanum is more valuable than gold. When you ask for relief, your options are usually a stiff drink or a cheery platitude from matron about the moral value of suffering. They'll say it builds character, as if you were collecting it like stamps. Physical therapy tools often include a cane, providence, and the steadfast hope that your friends are strong enough to help you down the stairs. Of course, recovery isn't just about mended bones or neatly sewn stitches. It's about reassuming your old life, minus whichever body parts were deemed expendable by the surgeon. In Victorian rehabilitation, you're congratulated for learning to make do. Family members fuss over you, a spectacle laced with pride and nervous horror. Careful to say you look very well, considering, as portraits are hustled off the piano and out of your line of sight. Visitors whisper stories about a neighbour's distant cousin who bounced right back from amputation, as if it's a competitive sport. And although you can barely stand, there's talk of your return to work before the week is out. Doctors, Meanwhile, bask in the limelight of your improbable survival. They'll nod sagely and insist it was their calibrated prescriptions that saw you through. Never mind last night's fever and the fact you're missing a suspicious amount of hair. For all their pride, it's traditional for the medical establishment to rapidly distance themselves from any lingering oddities. The limp, the cough, the smell of camphor that never quite washes off. In the ledger of Victorian medicine, a recovery is any outcome that doesn't involve carting you out feet first. What gets you through? Often, it's the camaraderie of other convalescents who share the experience of post-surgical roulette and swap tales of miracle cures with the wry fatalism of seasoned gamblers. If there's a moral to your tale, it's that the human determination to heal often outpaces the wisdom of doctors themselves. There's laughter to be found in small victories, a meal kept down, a day without fever, a night uninterrupted by leeches. Recovery becomes less about the promise of returning to normal and more about adapting, enduring, and choosing celebration in the face of absurdity. So, as you finally drift off, be grateful that your medicine cabinet doesn't include leeches or skunk cabbage, and that your checkups are latex gloved rather than performed with whatever's lying on the butcher's block. The Victorians endured more than their fair share of agony, absurdity, and, let's be honest, some truly questionable professionals. Tonight, give a little nod of respect to those iron-willed ancestors who survived radical surgery, mysterious potions, and the sort of advice that could only come from someone who's never had a cold. Because history is both our warning and our proof. People will do anything for a shot at health, even if that means cupping, drilling, or chugging mercury smoothies. Sleep well, knowing that tomorrow's medicine, however weird it gets, will probably still be an improvement. And that bed you're in, a veritable palace compared to the hospital cots of Victorian England. Good night and good health, no bloodletting required. So, as you finally drift off, be grateful that your medicine cabinet doesn't include leeches or skunk cabbage, and that your checkups are latex gloved rather than performed with whatever's lying on the butcher's block. The Victorians endured more than their fair share of agony, absurdity, and, let's be honest, some truly questionable professionals. Tonight, give a little nod of respect to those iron-willed ancestors who survived radical surgery, mysterious potions, and the sort of advice that could only come from someone who's never had a cold. Because history is both our warning and our proof. People will do anything for a shot at health, even if that means cupping, drilling, or chugging mercury smoothies. Sleep well knowing that tomorrow's medicine, however weird it gets, will probably still be an improvement. And that bed you're in, a veritable palace compared to the hospital cots of Victorian England. Good night and good health, no bloodletting required.